Welcome to USA Football's Coach and Coordinator Podcast, where top football coaches from around the country share their stories, philosophies, concepts, and strategies to help you get better on and off the field. Now, here's your host, Keith Grabowski.
Welcome to the Coach and Coordinator Podcast. We are recording live from USA Football's National Conference in Louisville, and joining me on the podcast, which he does quite often now because I love his articles, is the head football coach at St. Charles North, Rob Pomazak, and his offensive coordinator, Brian Flynn. So guys, it's great. I love when I actually get to sit down with somebody and talk to them face-to-face rather than over the phone. So it's great to see you guys here in Louisville.
Thanks for having us, Keith. This is a good opportunity. Appreciate it.
Very much.
Well, as we were thinking about what could we talk about here, I very often don't have two guests, especially a head coach and his offensive coordinator. And, I think there's always an interesting dynamic with that. And you see how it's handled in different ways. And you hear about maybe the coach who does everything, and the offensive coordinator is just the guy underneath him and an assistant and does whatever he says. But you guys have a good working relationship, a shared vision, and I'm sure that goes a long way. You've been with him now for 5 years, and just that trust between you two. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think first and foremost is that, Brian and we're friends. So it's a lot of fun to go to work with a really close friend that you do share a mission with. And the thing that really attracted me to Brian when we were in the interview process, is we didn't know each other at first, was just that I want somebody who's going to challenge me as a head coach to work harder and be a better version of myself. And when we sat down and talked, it was just his attention to detail and his drive to be an elite level coordinator was something that was attractive to me, because I knew when I came to work I was going to have my A game on, because in this day and age of being a high school football coach, it's hard to find people who want it as bad as you do. And with Brian, I think it's something that on a daily basis we're trying to create the best possible experience for our kids and the best team too. I don't know. That's my version of it.
Yeah. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I agree. Rob has given me quite a bit of autonomy. So because you mentioned trust, and I think that's as important, if not the single most important aspect of our relationship, is because he trusts that I'm going to do my job. And because we do have a shared vision of kind of what our program, what we want it to look like, then he knows that I'm going to do the best I can. So I'm going to be, going to clinics, going to conferences, reaching out to those that know way more than I do, and trying to bring those things back to our program, again, to try and give our kids the best experience that we can.
Right. I think what's interesting, as you said, Rob, like it started with you didn't know each other.
Right.
So let's step back to year one. As this gets started, you still have to have trust.
Right.
You hired the guy. So from the get-go, what was the working relationship like?
I thought Brian knew his system inside and out, and more importantly, I thought he could teach it. We're teachers first, and Brian has an educational background, so the idea of him being able to facilitate his message and his vision of what the offense should be was something that I was comfortable with him being in front of the entire program with. It was something he presented to me, and his track record, obviously he was very successful at his former school, so that kind of carried into it as well. But it was just something where it's got to be earned, and the only way you earn trust is by spending time together, in my opinion. And that was something that Brian never shied away from. From the time he got the position, him and I spent countless hours together, and more so is not for him to prove to me that he was worthy of calling the offense, but we're teaching me on what he wanted the offense to be. And that's kind of why I appreciate our relationship so much, is because I learn from him on a daily basis, because we don't ever run the same program 2 years in a row. I think every year is a different year, different kids, different expectations. And so we're constantly looking at how we can improve the program. And sometimes the other coaches look at it, well, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But in our opinion, it's more of, we haven't achieved what we wanted to yet, and we can always get better. And Brian shares that message, and he's always done that. And so that's kind of his hunger is what really kind of attracted me to it.
Brian, from your perspective, at the beginning, earning that trust, as Coach mentioned, how did you approach that?
Well, again, I I have a fair amount of confidence in what we're doing. Again, not because it's anything I invented. It's all stuff that I've learned from previous coaches. I had been at a school where Loyola Academy in Chicago, where John Halasek, former NFL player, is the head coach. And then from there, I spent some time in Western Michigan, and our head coach at the school I was at there had come from Grand Valley State. He'd been an OC for Brian Kelly. So I feel like I've learned a lot of information from smart people. And so when I came back to Illinois and was able to interview for the job, I think it's just, like I said, it's a matter of doing your job, having a good understanding of what you want to do, and then being able, again, to teach it. I guess I do have a little bit of a unique relationship in that I am a teacher, but I don't teach anymore. My wife is a doctor, so I'm predominantly a stay-at-home dad, and so that relationship with my kids allows me to be with my kids more than maybe a full-time teacher coach has. Right. But it also allows me to coach, which is what I really love to do. One of the hurdles is obviously trying to balance. Like, one of the things that I tell Rob that I struggle with is I don't want to be a ghost to our players. They got to be able to see me. I don't want to be the guy that shows up in June and just tells them what to do. So getting over those hurdles and being present as much as possible in the spring through meetings, weightlifting, those types of things also will kind of help that situation. But again, overall, I think it's just having confidence in what you're doing. And then when you don't, or when you aren't sure about something, then having the being humble enough to ask those who do know and find an answer to a question or a problem.
So in looking at that, you mentioned, getting better every year. And I think over my shoulder here is Chuck Kyle. He talked on the podcast before about every season being a book, right? You got to write those chapters. So you come out of one season and you want to learn from that and figure out what is this next team. And as you mentioned, we haven't gotten to where we want to be yet, so we're always going to look at how we get better. What's the process for you guys? And I guess I'm sure you're driving it on the offensive side. How do you work along with Brian on here's what we need to do next?
Well, it's just an end of year audit. The same way we look at the X's and O's, we look at the state of the team from a philosophical standpoint. But even opportunities like this where we're away from the school, away from the home, we sat down for 2.5 hours and planned our curriculum for the summer, talking about what's June going to look like. We have 25 days of contact in the summer, so that's got to be planned out. And so we're going to sit down and we're going to talk about how are we going to target our culture, how are we going to target the offense, the defense, and we kind of bounced ideas off each other. And really that's the nice thing about my defensive background and Brian's offensive background is we find that commonality from a teaching standpoint. What are the objectives, what are the key questions you want answered, and then what's the structure and the scaffold that you're going to use. And it's nice to have somebody to bounce ideas off of. As a head coach, it's it's a lonely place at times because there's not people who always want to share in that deep conversation with you. So it's appreciated to have that. And so we'll sit down and we'll talk about it at length. And the nice thing with Brian is that it's the opportunity over the phone. We live close to each other. Our families are friends, so the kids can play and him and I can sit back and talk about how we want to develop the program. And as a head coach, I need that because sometimes you don't believe in what you're doing is the right thing to be doing for the program. And it's nice to have somebody who will either be the contrarian to that and say, have you thought about this, or reinforce what you want to do.
Yeah. Brian, for you, you go through and you look at and you evaluate the offense, do all your work there. How are you leaning on Coach maybe to help you get some of those questions answered?
I'm still in that process of doing the end of the year type stuff. So I'll do a lot of that stuff at home. So when I complete that, we'll meet and we'll kind of have an end of the year audit type thing where we'll talk about those things. I mean, you have a relatively good idea of what went well and what didn't, just obviously from the results of the season. So we'll get together and do that. The other thing that we'll do that Rob's done is he's put together basically a Google folder essentially with like expectations and some questions and some thoughts to kind of focus on in the spring. He's done that for all the coaches, all the assistants, all the coordinators. And so, hey, these are the 4 or 5 aspects I'd like you to focus on during the clinic season. So we can try to get some information on those things that obviously were points of emphasis from the previous year that didn't really meet the standard that we want.
Right.
And so those are things that we do, and coming here obviously helps that, and other clinics, and visiting. We're going to visit University of Minnesota in a few weeks to try and address a lot of those issues.
Yeah, when I look at the high school level, more and more, it starts to maybe mimic the higher levels where you do see some situations where there's a lot of pressure on somebody in your position put on him from the guy above. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing or something that for you will work long term. The way you guys work together and realizing it's not about you, it's not about me. If something's not happening right on what you're doing, I'm here to help you rather than putting you under his thumb.
Yeah.
Right.
How helpful is that in just helping you do your job to the best of your ability?
Oh, I think it's awesome. Rob constantly is asking, what do you need from me? What can I do to support you? So knowing that you have that from your head coach, just allows you the freedom to kind of explore and say, okay, maybe I don't need anything here, but I might need something here. And he's all about doing everything he can. He views his role very, I know he's the head coach and he's my boss, but I don't really view him as the boss. He's more about the whole kind of servant leader.
Right.
I'm here to serve you. What can I do to help you? What can I do to make your job easier? Because like you said, ultimately it is always, always, always about we're trying to do what's best for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's never about Rob. It's never about me. It's always about what can we do to make the experience better for our kids.
Yeah, and I know you said make the experience better. You guys work hard on the experience.
For sure.
Not that this is just wins or our offense going out and executing. And you've talked about some of those examples here on the podcast. We'll link to some of your other ones. I think we did one of my favorites I remember doing with you, installing fun, right? Right. But it's not just about making it fun. It's about what you guys are doing to create something that these kids are going to take with them, the lessons, the memories, all of it for the rest of their life.
For sure. It's always going to be about the kids, the people over the players for us, but that's my role as the head coach. I'm fortunate that I never claim to be the smartest person in the room. I'm going to hire people who are smarter than me to run our offenses and defenses, and that's kind of having Brian and our defensive coordinator, Rick, has allowed me to step into the role of looking at the program from a holistic standpoint, and kind of being able to fill the voids that aren't X's and O's. And it's a very symbiotic relationship where we all serve our role. And I do want to support my coordinators because nobody wants to win more than the coaches. I tell our parents at our parent meeting every year, as much as you want your kid to win and the team to win, nobody wants the team to win more than us. We don't care who plays, though, when we win. But the idea being that we're going to figure out a way from a coaching staff to support each other, because that's where it all starts. We spend so much time with each other throughout the season and the off season that for us not to get along or for it to be a top-down mentality where we're afraid to make mistakes. Even from a player standpoint, you never want your kids to be afraid to make a mistake on the football field. I don't want my coordinators to be afraid to make a mistake or what they would deem the wrong call or the wrong scheme, because inevitably we got to learn from it one way or another. And I never learned that way, so I don't want our staff or our program to develop that way either.
Yeah. And it's about the relationships that you're building.
No doubt.
With we always talk about it with the players, but it only works if there's that relationship you build with the staff as well. So let's get into the practical side of this and learn a little bit about the mechanics of how this works in a game week and on game day. So you've taken a role where, as you said, you are, I guess in a lot of ways, like the CEO of the program. You have your guys who run the offense, the guys who run the defense. You're able to help as needed, as you said, taking a servant leader approach. So let's start the week off. What does it look like for you as far as, Brian, how you're orchestrating this, and then I guess, Rob, how you might be inserting yourself into it, where you come into play as the head coach?
Typical week in the past has started on Saturdays with evaluation of the previous night's game. So we'll go through all that. And then once the kids leave and we begin our game planning process, obviously we talk as a full staff a little bit, personnel, basic things, then we break off. And then, so I'll help run or conduct the offensive staff meeting. Rob has predominantly been in the defensive staff meetings. And then, so we'll do our stuff. and then we're done when we're done. Usually, at some point on Saturday, Rob always checks in before he leaves. So if a couple of us need to stay later, we do or whatever. And then, we'll break off on our own. We'll work on our own until Sunday, and then Sunday night, Rob and I always check in over the phone.
Yeah.
And so that's the beginning of the game planning process. And then everything we do on both sides of the ball is Google Docs. So shared documents. So it's not, there's no secrets. Everything is
right. I like that you guys do that.
And it's really, we have a number, including me, we have a number of guys that don't teach in the building. So it's partly out of necessity, but it's also obviously a very valuable tool to communicate, obviously, for a large group of people.
So let's go back though to wrapping up that game before and having that staff meeting, coming out of a game where something didn't go right. When you sit down with your staff, who's the one who brings that up? Who's the one who says, you know what, this isn't where we need to be with it? Is that you? Is it Rob? Has it been a combination of that?
Well, if we're all together as the staff together to start, it's usually going to be Rob. It can come from anybody, though. It's not like it has to come from Rob. But if there's a situation that happened in a game, then it needs to be talked about. And quite honestly, sometimes it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there's been more than one occasion where I feel like, I screwed up. I made a mistake. I did something that it was a mistake in that game. And so Saturday mornings, sometimes it's still a little raw. So it might get discussed. It might not get completely settled because it might need a little more time. But it ultimately does. Maybe the following day, hey, we got to address what we were talking about the other day, because we don't want maybe one or two things to kind of hold the entire day hostage, because obviously Saturdays are already a long day. We all have families. We don't want to be there till 8 p.m. So we'll address it. If it doesn't get completely settled, then we'll come back around to it and get to it. But we need to move on for now and start working on the next opponent. There's obviously a finite amount of time, or if it was an offensive issue, when we break off into our meetings, maybe we can readdress that. Hey, it requires a deeper discussion. Yeah. It could be a personnel issue. It could be a scheme issue, a call issue. I like to think that we're all mature enough to handle those things, but sometimes they can. We're all very respectful. Sometimes it can be a little emotional, though. Especially if you didn't win the game, so you already have that result,
right?
Brewing. So, but ultimately, I think the way we go about that process, I think, is very, very productive.
It's very solutions based. You're not going to sit there and cry over spilled milk.
Right.
I'll write down the list of things that we want to go over as a staff up on the dry erase board. We'll talk personnel, we'll talk practice planning segments, and then from there we'll go to anything that needs to be developed and changed a little bit. So from that standpoint, it usually gets rectified, and then we start moving on with the next week.
All right, so those things get solved. You move on with the new week. Are there any situations, as you're looking at it, Brian, where you guys on your side of the ball say, not quite sure if this is the answer or this, let's get the boss involved? Does that happen? Is there any part of the game plan where you've looked to Rob to help you with an answer?
Yeah, well, we'll always bounce those types of issues off of Rob, especially because with Rob's very strong defensive background, it always can be that, hey, this is what we think we might get. What would you do? Especially if we're playing a team that plays a similar scheme to us. Yeah, those situations come up, and that ability to kind of bounce those ideas off each other. It's funny, we were just talking about that earlier today.
Yeah.
About, hey, what would you do? And you play those roles, which obviously helps us grow as coaches and maybe see things from a slightly different, through a slightly different lens as you're prepping for that opponent.
So as you head through the week, we get to game day, and that's something that has to be, at least in my opinion, pretty well orchestrated between all the phases of the game.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody has to say, we're going fast now, or hey, we need to control the clock, or you got 4 downs on this. How are you driving those decisions? And I guess the other part of it, we were talking about Jerry Smith from St. Francis. in New York, and how he on the podcast in 42 years he's never told anybody to run this play. So I think that's an interesting dynamic too, because I've been in those situations where head coaches let me do my thing, and I've been in those situations where head coaches said you need to run this time. So how does game day work out for you guys?
Well, for us, it starts with the pregame where we're going to go over our situations. Brian and I have a checklist of situational management that we're going to talk about every situation so that we're prepared for it. I'll write it down on my game card. When the game gets going, I'm predominantly going to be looking to be one step ahead. So I'm more game management, time management, situation management than I am concerning myself with what's being watched on the screens behind me in between series. So during a defensive series, I'm going to be looking at the secondary. But one thing that we've done prior to this, I should have said, is that we establish an in-game routine, a protocol of communications, so that we will go over that with the staff. And so there's a very distinct way that we're going to communicate from a standpoint of in between plays, who's got the mic, in between series, how are we going to relay messages that are coming from the booth down to our offensive line coach or our coordinator, and then eventually the communications that's going to get to the kids. And that's something that we talk about as a staff. That's something that we practice during our scrimmage games and during our practices, because the last thing any of us want is to have somebody who's screaming over the headset when we're trying to concentrate. And my job as a head coach, I'll let Brian know situations. Hey, we're in 4-down territory. Think about 2-minute drill, middle 4 minutes, Brian. Let's make sure that we want to put some points on the board. If there's a personnel situation I think we can take advantage of, I might cue him on that. But when it comes down to calling the plays, that's his show. And that's something where I'm gonna, it's gonna go quiet, and it's gonna be his opportunity to make the call. And I trust him, and I always think the best call is going to come from him, not from me, because my investment on the offensive game plan is very limited. And so I'm going to trust the guys who spend the time on film, and at that point, it's not me. And if I really feel strongly about something, Brian, we'll have that conversation, but it's not really something in the heat of a game that I think that's my place. It's happened before where I've been a little more opinionated than probably I want it to be, and Brian has said, hey, listen, I need the mic, and I need to stay in my rhythm. And that's what I appreciate, is the fact that he's man enough and I'm man enough for us to have that conversation. And then, we're hugging each other at the end of the game. There's no animosity. It's just two guys who really want the best for the program. Right. And I appreciate that he's able to keep me in check, and that's because he trusts me and I trust him.
Brian, from your perspective then, whether it's halftime or in between series, the adjustment part of it, right? And understanding maybe some of the feedback you've gotten from Coach, making those adjustments, making sure, hey, I heard this from him, let's make sure we address this. Talk about that process, because you only have a few minutes.
Right. Well, like Coach Rob mentioned, the pregame meeting that we have, we talk about a lot of those things. So it's going into the game, we have a relatively good idea of what's going to happen. In the midst of the game, like Rob does not really talk a whole lot during the play calling process, unless it comes up, hey, so-and-so, maybe there's a new corner in, so we can go exploit that guy. There's a new DN or whatever. It could be something as much as, hey, so-and-so hasn't really touched the ball in a while. The small, short comments that I can, so it's not necessarily a play, but it could be someone to pick on, someone to go after, or hey, let's get the ball to our dudes, because obviously that's what's going to give us the best chance to win. Post-series, there's sometimes a brief conversation about what do we want to do next, like if it's the middle 8 minutes, that type of thing. Right. And then there might be a brief conversation like on the play that turns into the next possession, so like a punt or a kickoff. Hey, let's do this, let's do that. But from a specific play, it's actually very little.
Well, I appreciate both of you taking some time and giving us a peek inside basically this relationship that you guys have put together, and how you're able to work together in a way that is best, as you said, for the kids, right? For the team, because it's not about either of you guys. So I appreciate what both of you are doing. I hope you enjoy yourselves here this weekend, and certainly looking forward to some more of those articles.
Coming, I got one ready. Thanks, Keith.
Appreciate what you do, Keith.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out all we're doing on Twitter at FBDEV Coach. Follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski. And check out our systems for tackling, blocking, and defeating blocks at footballdevelopment.com.
Thanks for listening to USA Football's Coach and Coordinator Podcast. For more resources, visit the Coach Performance Center at usafootball.com.